Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Amanda N and today I'm here to talk about old conspiracy theories. And no, I don't mean Pizzagate or old as in a few years ago old, but 18th and 19th century old. Though I'm sure that many of you guessed that from the title. Even though conspiracy theories may spread extremely quickly these days thanks to the internet, TikTok, Facebook, and plenty of other social media apps or things of that nature, conspiracy theories aren't anything new. So today we're going to get into what some of those old conspiracy theories may be. I want to apologize in advance for my pronunciation. A few of these names are a bit tricky, and sorry if I sound a little bit sore. I've been talking all day today, so my voice is not quite there, but we'll try to get through this together. Anyway, we'll start with plenty of 19th century conspiracies that centered around politics. That is also nothing new. One of the oldest and most known conspiracy theorists from that day was a French Catholic priest called Augustin Barruel. According to one source, he wrote a multi-volume 1797 book called Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism, about an alleged conspiracy that led to the outbreak of the French Revolution, but it has been reprinted many times and translated into several languages. Not long after the publication of his work, Barruel was sent a letter by a man called Jean-Baptiste Simony, who alleged that the Jews were also part of the conspiracy. This letter, the original of which has never been found, continues to shape anti-Semitic conspiracy thinking to this day. Even before the revolution, Barruel had become famous in France as a conservative writer and journalist. The trainee Jesuit priest strongly opposed the new philosophy of the time, the convictions of Diderot, d'Alembert, or even Voltaire, which he regarded as radical. The reason why I bring him up at all is because Barruel was also one of the main players in the Illuminati scare in the US. Don't get me wrong, the Illuminati did exist in France in 1722, the Illuminés or Illuminated shortly before the French Revolution, but they disbanded before it ended in 1794. Most other sources actually say they were founded in 1776, but you get the idea. Yes, they were a group of illuminated people, and their history goes back even further than the 17th century. Yet, Barruel argued that the Illuminati's goal was to make their way deep into the French elite and overthrow the monarch, which was, in short, nonsense. In actuality, the Illuminati were just enlightened thinkers. According to the BBC, it was on the 1st of May in 1776 that Adam Weishaupt, a professor of law at the University of Ingolstadt, founded the Order of the Illuminati, a secret organization formed to oppose religious influence on society and the abuse of power by the state, fostering a safe space for critique, debate, and free speech. Inspired by the Freemasons and French Enlightenment philosophers, Weishaupt believed that society should no longer be dictated by religious virtues. Instead, he wanted to create a state of liberty and moral equality, where knowledge was not restricted by religious prejudices. However, religious and political conservatism ruled in Ingolstadt at the time, and subject matter taught at the Jesuit-controlled university where Weishaupt lectured was strictly monitored. It really seems, based on my research anyway, that the Illuminati were just people that oppose the cultural norm. That's it. The separation of church and state may be normal to us now, or at least in the US, but it wasn't then. People that opposed it were seen as these wicked snakes trying to take out the monarchy when, frankly, the monarchy did have too much power at the time, hence the revolution. Of course, this notion is far more complicated and far more multifaceted than just one group didn't like the monarchy and one group did, but still, I find it fascinating that this notion of the Illuminati wanting control or having power is what's perpetuated throughout the years when really the French Illuminati wasn't founded on these beliefs in the first place. They just wanted to break the status quo a bit, and rightfully so. Other conspiracies that took place in the 19th century were incredibly xenophobic, unsurprisingly. In some of my other videos, such as the one about feral people and pseudo-architecture, I talk about their roots in racism. Unfortunately, this is no different. The Smithsonian writes that from 1820 to 1845, anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000 immigrants entered the US each year. Then, as a consequence of economic instability in Germany and a potato famine in Ireland, those figures turned from a trickle into a tsunami. Between 1845 and 1854, in just those 9 years, 2.9 million immigrants poured into the country, and many of them were of Catholic faith. Suddenly, more than half the residents of New York City were born abroad, and Irish immigrants comprised 70% of charity recipients. As cultures clashed, fear exploded, and conspiracies abounded. Posters around Boston proclaimed, "All Catholics and all persons who favor the Catholic Church are vile impostors, liars, villains, and cowardly cutthroats." Convents were said to hold young women against their will. An exposé published by Maria Monk, who claimed to have gone undercover in one such convent, accused priests of raping nuns and then strangling the babies that resulted. It didn't matter that Monk was discovered as a fraud. Her book sold hundreds of thousands of copies. The conspiracies were so virulent that churches were burned, and know-nothing gangs spread from New York and Boston to Philadelphia, Baltimore, Louisville, Cincinnati, New Orleans, St. Louis, and San Francisco. At the same time as this influx of immigrants reshaped the makeup of the American populace, the old political parties seemed poised to fall apart. The know-nothings came out of what seemed to be a vacuum, said Christopher Phillips, professor of history at University of Cincinnati. It's the failing Whig Party and the faltering Democratic Party and their inability to articulate, to the satisfaction of the great percentage of their electorate, answers to the problems that were associated with everyday life. Don't get me wrong, the Catholic Church has had its issues. However, these conspiracies didn't seem to be based on testimony or any credible sources, but just straight-up xenophobia and racism against the Irish. Some sources argue that these know-nothings, or this Whig Party, was a lot like the 19th century version of QAnons, and they too were so convinced that the country was being controlled by secret groups, terrified of the changing country around them. The groups had actual names, one being the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, but they were told to reply, "I know nothing," when asked about their political plans, hence the know-nothing name coming into being. The know-nothings spread misinformation and had outwardly proposed a briefly popular platform calling for the exclusion of Chinese people and other Asians from industrial employment. Millard Fillmore is largely to credit for the destruction of the Whig Party, the vice president in 1848. Still, how appropriate is it that the know-nothings, of all names, spread these ridiculous conspiracies during their time, in large part because of their own paranoia? They spread vile things about immigrants, leading to 11 Italian Americans being lynched in New Orleans at the end of the 19th century. A mob there was furious over the murder of a city police chief, and the New York Times itself wrote, "These sneaking and cowardly Sicilians, the descendants of bandits and assassins who have transported to this country the lawless passions, the cutthroat practices, and the oath-bound societies of their native country, are to us a pest without mitigation." This was the New York Times, people. In actuality, there was no evidence against anyone, let alone Italian Americans, in the murder of the police chief. But these Italian Americans, one of them as young as 14, were all killed because of a rumor that when the chief lay dying, he had supposedly used a derogatory slur for Italians. A rumor, just a rumor, that led to 11 lynchings. New Orleans has since apologized for this, not that they were the only ones feeding into these dangerous conspiracies and hate groups at the time, though. Of course, while these conspiracy theories are darker, more politically charged, and more racially motivated, there are some that were a bit more specific. One theory that went around is that the assassination of Lincoln wasn't the act of a lone gunman, John Wilkes Booth, but an organized conspiracy hatched by a number of disgruntled Southerners. While some did seem to enjoy or relish in Lincoln's death, Booth alone was the mastermind to kill Lincoln. There were others, like Lewis Powell and George Astaroth, that were complicit and had knowledge of the plot, but the idea that more people were involved doesn't really have the evidence to back it up. Some conspiracies around this get far more ridiculous as you dig, such as the idea that Andrew Johnson, the secretary, Stanton, or the Pope were all involved somehow. According to one source, no president had been assassinated up to that point, and the idea that an actor and his ragtag co-conspirator could pull it off seemed unlikely to many, explains David Goldfield. He's the Robert Lee Bailey Professor of History at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and author of the 2011 book, America Aflame: How the Civil War Created a Nation. A major crime required a major plot, he said. Some suspected that the plot had to be the work of full-fledged agents of the Confederacy's Secret Service Bureau, operating at the behest of a Confederate President Jefferson Davis. The idea of an international Jewish conspiracy against Lincoln resonated among some in the early Republican Party, which included some who'd been involved in the Know Nothing Party, a movement that opposed immigration, particularly of Roman Catholics and Jews. Add to the mix the fact that Edwin Stanton had allegedly made several anti-Semitic remarks, and that he was among the leading figures in the post-assassination investigation, Goldfield says. As a result, it seemed to many that Lincoln's assassination was a Jewish conspiracy, and more particularly an effort to derail the Union war effort so the Rothschild could get their money back. Of course, if that was the case, then Booth and company waited too long because Lee had already surrendered by the time Lincoln was assassinated. Some conspiracies did make sense to these people at the time. Absolutely, while today, looking back, it seems so ridiculous and outlandish, laughable, that we would even believe these things. Conspiracies have always been dangerous. Many are more hate groups than conspiracy groups. The line has been blurred for centuries. While some may seem funny, like the conspiracy that Bigfoot exists, many more are truly scary. I suppose it's both comforting and terrifying, though, that the conspiracies that spread today are nothing new. Sure, we may have social media to make them spread faster, but humankind has always been this way. And on that somewhat depressing note, that's actually where I'm going to end today's video. Let me know if there's any more conspiracies you'd like me to talk about down below, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!